it's not enough to just be a good operator. You actually have to really believe. And so I started thinking a lot about, well, what do I believe? What change do I want to see in the world? What outcomes am I passionate about producing? And I think this notion of shared upside really captured my imagination. There's that great quote, I don't know who came up with this, but they say crypto turns communists into capitalists and capitalists into communists. And the idea is that you can both have ownership, but you can share that ownership with others.
Today we are here with Jonny, who is the founder of Fabric, which is the parent company of Hypersub, which is a protocol, a Web3 protocol for creators. And Jonny, before Hypersub, he has a long history of building tech products. So I'm very excited to talk to him about the vision on Hypersub, Fabric, what he has done in the past, and Farcaster as well, because you have been very active from the early days, Jonny. I think you're a great example of marketing in Web3. You're very, very active with memes. So very curious to hear your thoughts there. But yeah, can you tell us a bit about Hypersub, Jonny, for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, sure. So Hypersub is a product that we built about 6 months ago. It is essentially two things. It's a protocol and it's an app. So the protocol is essentially just an NFT, and it adds kind of this dimension of time to the notion of NFTs. So with typical NFTs, you would pay a price to mint a token. And with a Hypersub NFT, you're effectively minting time on a token. So the creator, when they deploy it, they can say, rather than it just being, $10, it's $10 per month. Mm-hmm. And what that effectively does is it is used as an access pass. So I mint, say, a month for $10, and then I get access to whatever that creator is doing, whether it's drops for visual art, whether it's IRL events, dinners, poker games, token gated articles, group chats, like whatever. We see a lot of people doing different things, whether it's art subscriptions, membership clubs, freelancers have been using it, publishing, SaaS companies are using it. So essentially at the TLDR is that it's a payment rail. But we've stylized it in this, and we've made kind of a product out of it. But that's the basic idea. So by protocol, I just mean it's a smart contract and it's on chain. And so the novel thing there is that the subscription data, so the time, who has subscribed and for how long, is all public. And then the credential itself is also public, so it can be used by other systems. Mm-hmm. So one of the analogies I like to make is it's kind of like it's like a subway card. You put time on the card, and then that grants you access to the train. But the difference is that it works all over the world. So the analogy would be like, if every city is a different place that you can go on the internet, then this pass kind of works, whether you're on a group chat in Workcast, or a blog post on Paragraph, or an allow list on Highlight, whatever the case may be. It's your universal access pass.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I come from the Substack world, which is a publishing platform for writers. And I started my newsletter there 3 years ago. So in May, it's going to be 3 years. And, Substack is great. They have some amazing features, but it's not Web3 native, right? So I've been missing the payments with crypto. I've been missing like NFT drops or even the subscription NFT. And Hypersub solved that problem for me, and it's highly integrated with Farcaster, but also Paragraph is easy to integrate to other applications, other smart contracts. And as you said, it's not only for writers like myself. We can do podcasts, you can do visual art, you can do many things. So I highly encourage people to try it out. I'm sure you can if you're in the NFT world, Hypersub definitely fits there. It makes things easier. And as Jonny said, it's just been 6 months, so that's quite the journey. Jonny, did you expect to grow so fast? What are your thoughts there? Maybe some stats from
Yeah.
Hypersub.
Yeah. So, we built this over the kind of like, I guess, the last year in the fall. So I think we launched it in November, I want to say, something like that. And n- nobody cared at all. It felt like it just went over people's heads. And there was a couple months, maybe 2 or 3 months. You can see this is like actually all public. It's on our Dune dashboard. So if you go to dune.com/fabric/protocol, you can kind of see all of our stats. But yeah, for the first few months, it just felt like we completely blew it. That we built something that nobody wanted or understood, and it was, to be honest, it was like soul crushing, and I felt like adrift and panicked and anxious, and then kind of out of nowhere, I think mostly on from the tailwinds of Farcaster's growth, it like blew up, and you can see that in the graph. It basically goes from nothing to just like vertical growth, right? Like really fast. And we have some kind of theories as to why. Oxen, so the artist
Yeah.
Oxen, who's been kind of native to Farcaster for a long time, he actually kind of inspired us to build Hypersub. He was like, look, no one's really built like a crypto native Patreon. Like,
Yeah.
you guys should do that. And so we thought very deeply about what that could and should look like, and ultimately landed on Hypersub. But anyway, his art kind of blew up, I think, in also kind of on the back of Farcaster's growth. And then when he said, look, I have this Hypersub NFT, and you can subscribe and you can get monthly airdrops, I think what people did is they kind of looked at his floor price, which was rapidly rising, and then they were looking at the cost of his Hypersub, and they looked at that delta, and they were like, oh, wait a minute, this is like a no-brainer, because
Yeah.
it's very, very inexpensive per month, but his floor price on his works are like really high. So that's like clearly a win. And that, I think, is what kicked it off. I think his success kind of signaled to a number of other artists that you could make real money. I mean, I think he made, I don't know, it was like between 80 and $100,000, like,
Wow.
in like a week
Yeah.
or less even. So, and then some of the rev share, we kind of have this like means by which you can, if you subscribe early and for a long period of time, you can get kind of cut into the creator's upside. So we're doing some like novel crypto things there. And I think that's what made it work, and that's what made people realize, like, oh, there's actually something here. And so the more visual artists started to use it, the more other people like you and YB and 0x Designer started using it for freelance work. And then it was kind of game on. Then it was like, okay, cool. Like, all right, we're like on the path now. Now I think every founder is desperate for information. The worst thing you could possibly do is build something that nobody wants and nobody uses. And it's like fundamentally like a low information situation where
Yeah.
you built stuff, and you're just like, it's like nothing's happening. You're not getting good feedback, you're not getting bad feedback, you're just getting nothing. So once we started seeing all this usage, we started getting feedback and suggestions and complaints, and now we were like, okay, cool, we can cook now.
Mm.
We have some signal as to like what people want and they don't want, and we can use that to kind of inform the next set of decisions that we make. I mean, I've been into crypto for a long time. Like, I got in, oh, I guess it's been like 10 years. I didn't realize that till I just said it. But yeah, I bought my first Bitcoin in 2014 on Coinbase. Like everybody who is still working, I didn't buy enough. uh, but I was fascinated by it. And then I remember paying close attention to the Ethereum crowdfund and buying some Ethereum, but not really understanding what it was, just thinking it was cool and interesting and liking the people that were in the space. And then in 2017, I was working at Google, and I remember thinking, okay, now's the time. Like, DeFi summer had happened, and I was like, this is just a fascinating space. And So I left Google to go kind of work in crypto full time. Ended up going to Coinbase and did a bunch of work as a contractor for Coinbase over like a, I don't know, 4 or 5 year period. And then knew that I want to be a founder, but also knew that you, in some ways, I think that's a job that picks you. You don't necessarily get to pick it. The the special sauce of being a founder is conviction, and you can't fake conviction. You have to just genuinely believe in something bigger. And I remember being envious of, the founders who I had worked with who had clearly had that. I had felt like I was like this mercenary for so long, and they were like these missionaries. And I remember thinking like, yeah, that's the difference. It's not enough to just be a good operator. You actually have to really believe. And so I started thinking a lot about, well, what do I believe? What change do I want to see in the world? What outcomes am I passionate about producing? And I think this notion of shared upside really captured my imagination. There's that great quote, I don't know who came up with this, but they say crypto turns communists into capitalists and capitalists into communists. And the idea is that you can both have ownership, but you can share that ownership with others. And that is something that I just find endlessly fascinating. And so that's kind of been the maze that we've been in. That's what we've been trying to figure out how to achieve in this very user friendly way. And so, yeah, as we were looking at what to build, because we built a crowdfunding protocol that allowed people to kind of raise funds and share upside. There's a lot of legal issues with that, a lot of gray area. And so we were like, okay, this isn't quite right. And we were observing, user behaviors throughout the bear market as being primarily oriented around NFTs. It was like one of the very few things that people were actually doing every single day on chain. So we knew that there was something powerful about NFTs kind of as a primitive, and the mental model around NFTs seemed really sticky. So we were like, okay, whatever we do next, it should be oriented around an NFT. But then what? You're like, well, do we make a marketplace? Do we make a minting platform? Like, how do you differentiate in a meaningful way? We don't want to just be like a Me Too product. So we started thinking a lot about, well, what are people doing with NFTs? And like most of what you see is people, they just mint it and then it goes in their wallet and then they kind of forget about it and like end of story. And when you look at it from the perspective of the creator, they're like, well, they're doing a lot of mints. Why? Well, because they're trying to get money on a recurring basis. And then if you like kind of look back at the last bull cycle, you could see this use case around memberships. People were like, mint this NFT and like I'll do work on a recurring basis. And so we're like, okay, that's really interesting, but broken, because it creates this very asymmetrically unfavorable economic relationship between the creator and the consumer, because the creator is having to produce work on a consistent basis. So Callow, you're doing podcasts, you're writing articles, you're creating media very regularly. But the reason why using an NFT as your payment rail is kind of broken is because from the consumer's perspective, they're like, this is a great deal. I'll just mint it once and I get essentially like forever access. So you might get paid a big chunk of money once that's announced, and then effectively goes down to zero. Yeah. And so we're like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for innovation here. And so we thought a lot about, okay, how can you do subscriptions of NFTs? And this is like not a new idea. I mean, there was multiple EIPs that tried to get off the ground and they never really got the adoption. And then there's been multiple platforms that have tried to do this, but in our view, they were just like Web 2 platforms, and my kind of critical take is that most platforms essentially are psyoping creators into believing that the audience is subscribed to them, but they're not. They're subscribed to the platform. Mm. That is the platform's customer. They own all the subscriber data. They own the payment rail. That's their customer. It's not yours. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, well, great opportunity to counterposition here would be to give the creator complete control over the payment rail. So it's the creator who owns that contract. It's the creator who has the direct economic relationship with the consumer. And because it's the universal access pass, the credential is on chain, it's public, the subscription data is public, they're not locked in. They could go wherever they want. And so we were like, this just excited us. When it was like this idea that we couldn't let go of and couldn't stop thinking about. And so that was kind of the seed of Hypersub. And then we kind of hacked on it for a few months, and then did the contract, got it audited, and then
Yeah, one thing that I really like is that as you said, I own the contract, and I can just build a website, and the contract is under the hood, right?
yeah,
And people don't really need to go to Hypersub directly. I can do whatever I want. I can build the UI UX that I want,
yeah,
and that's something that I believe will start to happen, right? As more people joins Hypersub. Um, yeah, it's very user friendly, as Alex said. Um, Jonny, what are your thoughts? Because there are so many use cases, right?
yeah.
There are so many type of creators. So how do you see these evolving in the next year? What are consumers, people that subscribe, asking?
Yeah.
So where do you see it going?
It's a good question. It's something we think about all the time. Just to comment on what you'd said about, I can build a website and I don't have to ever go to Hypersub. That's like our dream. It's like that I want to be as thin as possible. And so like the idea that you can go to Bonfire and you can build token gated live streams or private sites, you can go to Paragraph and you can have, either private or semi-private publishing. You can go to Telegram, Discord, or Workcast to have private conversations. Like, this is what we're trying to facilitate, are these novel experiences kind of across platforms. And the reason why is because our view is that it's the creators that are the ones innovating, with their own audience. And so we don't, if we say, no, you can only do what we build. So you can't have a group chat until we build a group chat feature. And you can't have live streaming until we have live streaming. And you can't do this until we build it. Well, then we're kind of gatekeeping innovation. We're gatekeeping creativity. And so our view is that by removing those blocks, which is typically what you'd see on a Web2 platform, that there's this wide open frontier of like novel experiences. So that's where I see the future is, people want to belong to something. And I think that the modern world kind of creates a crisis of meaning. We don't all believe the same things. We don't all consume the same media. We don't all, we're kind of tribeless in this modern world, and we're trying to find places to belong and communities to belong to. And I think like I see creators kind of offering that. So whether that's oriented around art subscriptions, whether it's oriented around a specific membership club, whether it's oriented around publications, like we're seeing more and more of this. So to me, the future is less, I want to have 10 million followers on some platform, and it's more, I want to find my 1,000 true fans. So our perspective is like, take what you're doing, right? I would say there's thousands of people in the world that if they knew what you were doing, they'd be like ride or die for you. They're like all in on what you're doing. And I think that's true for like most creators. It's like the world is this giant haystack. And the challenge then becomes, how do you find these needles in the haystack? And I think the way that you do it is by creating really special experiences that make people feel like they belong to something bigger. And to me, Hypersub is the best way to do that, because it's by putting money in on a recurring basis, by showing up and like really participating, that's sending the signal like, okay, there's something meaningful being established here. So I don't necessarily want to have, don't get me wrong, scale and volume would be amazing, but I actually think that the more meaningful metric is like engagement, is like, I actually think creators want that more than anything. I think TikTok has shown like, great, you had a viral video, 1 million people saw it, but is that meaningful? Is it lasting? So anyway, that's kind of how that's what I think the future is, and that's what we're trying to kind of orient around as a result.
Yeah, no, definitely. And maybe I'll add another comment on Hypersub, which I think it's very important. At least that's how I lived during the bear market. So for me, it was very important that I have the subscription model, which wasn't at the time on Hypersub, because it was kind of recurrent revenue. It's just so important for creators, right? You when I also had a gallery that I have the blind gallery where we release art and sales, like sales day, it's so stressful, and there are so many things that will go wrong, the market, or maybe it's not the right time, etc. But if you have a business model where people can support you on a recurrent basis, just a little bit, then you are, it's like a small, like a salary, right, that
Yeah.
grows and grows, and the stress kind of goes away. At the beginning, it's more like a side project, right? But eventually, if you keep at it, it can grow into full time. It could be a full time job. So just for the, I've been talking to some artists, and I'm trying to emphasize on these, right? Like it's not something that you release and you expect to earn a lot of revenue during the first 2 months. It's more about the long term
Yeah.
and building that audience. Yeah, and just having that possibility there. And over time, you start to see this, and you say, okay, so maybe this month I will get $500. Maybe next month it's 1,000, and eventually it's like, okay, so I don't have. It's a big relief, right? Especially for artists, right? That it's so complicated and so volatile. And
Yeah. One of the most encouraging things, that I've heard, I mean, there's a lot from the creators that use Hypersub because they often will get, especially if they have an existing audience like you or like YB, or they're like, oh my God, like I had no idea I would like make this much. Like I remember talking to YB and he was like, it'd be really cool if I could get like $500, and
yeah,
he made 4 ETH, in like a month and a half or something like that. And so, you know, that to me is like, that's like fuel for us. It's like super inspiring. It kind of like reminds us like why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Max Jackson, who's an artist on Hypersub, who's really committed to it, and he was one of the first to really orient his work and his audience around it. He said like, yeah, I paid my rent with the money that I've earned on Hypersub. I got a studio. I got an
mm,
artist studio with the money that I've earned from Hypersub. And that to me is like,
yeah,
that's a signal that we're onto something, because you can't really do that with like a one-off free mint.
yeah,
Maybe you make like $100, or even if you make $500 once, it's like that. It's like, well, you got to keep doing that, and it's like then there's this fine line between doing what you need to do to make money, but also kind of shilling. Whereas I feel like with Hypersub, it's like you kind of just have this tight knit community of people that are supporting your work on a recurring basis. They expect to get the work regularly, and they don't really have to do a whole lot to get it. It
yeah,
just gets airdropped to them. So I think like, to me, that's super inspiring, and it's like what I want to see more of is like a cool metric is like, what is the number of creators on Hypersub that make their living
mm,
from what they do? Like that number should be going up if
yeah,
we do our
yeah.
job.
Yes, definitely. And the churn rate is also an important metric, which is hard for both sides, right? Because Hypersubs wants to help creators, so there is less churn, and also creators, of course, they don't want to see churn. But it's so hard. It doesn't really mean that you are not like a good creator if somebody churns. There are many reasons. But that's another good metric, I believe,
Agreed.
that I pay attention to.
We've
Yeah.
we've been thinking a lot about this. So the model, so there's basically two ways to earn recurring revenue on chain, which is there's what we have, which is you mint the time up front, and then that time runs. And then there's allowance based mechanisms where the consumer basically says, I will approve an allowance for this creator to withdraw some amount of funds per month. And then those either get withdrawn on some date, or they go into an escrow contract and they stream or something like that. There's problems with both of these models. Of course, with the approach that we took, it's extremely robust and it's favorable to the creator, but it does require the end user do work when they resubscribe. For the allowance-based model, it all actually also requires that the end user do work, because they have to, one, make sure that the funds are in the hot wallet, otherwise the transactions will revert, and number two, approve another allowance, unless the app asks for like $1 billion approval, which I actually think is really bad practice. So there's issues here. We're solving this in a few different ways. So the first is, this was like an immediate, urgent need we felt needed to get out, which we shipped, is notifications. So there's three sort of channels for notifications. There's emails, there's in-app notifications, and then there's Farcaster notifications. So we have the Hyperbot on Farcaster, and if you go and look at that profile, you can just see that it runs all day long. It notifies people when their subscriptions are about to expire. It notifies people of new drops. It notifies people if their referral links have been used and if they've earned a referral reward, etc. And then we have the same kinds of notifications on email and in the app as well. Though that's really helped kind of with retention and like churn reduction, but it's not enough. So the second thing that we're doing is monthly recurring credit card payments. So we're working on a V2 now, and we've discovered a really novel way to do recurring credit card payments in a kind of low risk way that no one's really done yet. So very excited about that. And that's truly set and forget. So the idea is you add your credit card info and it just runs. It just bills just like any other Web2 kind of subscription platform would. It just bills on the same day every month. And then the creator gets paid, the user stays retained until they cancel. The third is actually allowance-based. So I think we probably will do allowances. And I think that for some use cases, that's probably better than others. So in the more long-term, so there's kind of short-term, medium-term, long-term. The more long-term, different creators will have different options, and so they can kind of, do what works best for them. I'm still kind of bearish on allowances, just because I think they're complex and tricky to get to work right. But we will have that as an option. So those are kind of like the three main things. And then the last thing, we were just actually talking about this 20 minutes ago, is adding better analytics to the dashboard in Hypersub, so you can see what is the churn rate, of the number of subscribers you have, how many of them retain, how many of them don't, that sort of thing. And then kind of on a comment you made earlier about, the monthly recurring revenue, the other thing that we've been kind of thinking about is what if the creator could specify the amount of money that they want per month, and then we basically auto withdrew that from the contract and then sent it to them. But it could smooth out kind of the volatility of subscriptions. So for example, if one month you have a big month and you make like $2,000, and then the next month it's like a down month, you go on vacation or whatever, or you're not publishing as much, and you make $500, but then you tell Hypersub, look, I just pay me at like the same rate every single month. We can kind of compress the volatility and pay you out from your own contract.
Yeah.
So like, it's still yours. You can still go and yank all the money out whenever you want, but there's kind of a way to just be like, okay, I have an off ramp, and just give me the same amount of money every month. And what's there changes, it'll fluctuate.
Yeah.
Like there's like, when I used to freelance, there would be tools that did this for freelancers who kind of had more volatile income. So that's something we're thinking about as well, just to kind of, like I said, like make it, just smooth out the volatility and also make it feel like a little more recurring than it does now. So anyway, that's kind of how we're thinking about a lot of this stuff. I mean, if we want to build something that people can pay their rent with, we have to do things like this. Otherwise it's too all over the place.
So I've been using Stripe until now,
Yeah,
and Stripe has a lot of tools, to create invoice, to create to make it easy to fill your taxes.
yeah,
You have the customer information most of the time, which some countries require, right? When you fill your taxes, and as you said, if creators are going to be doing this full time, that sort of tools will help their life, make it easier, because it's already for accountants. When you go to an accountant and you say, hey, yeah, I'm a writer, but I earn in crypto, they are like, what's going on? And then they see it's not like one transaction, right? You have to explain, oh, I have hundreds of subscribers and they pay me every
yeah,
month, different days, a small amount. So yeah, that kind of tooling, and that could be very interesting because it's a product on itself, right? It's not only the subscription; it's also a way to help them, fill their taxes, manage their money online, make it
yeah.
easy to bring in offline if they need to.
It should not feel like work. It should not feel like a job. The worst thing I think an artist could do is overcommit, overpromise, and underdeliver, and then feel the stress and the anxiety of like having to deliver and feeling like you haven't, and people are pissed. Like, just bad outcome across the board. And so what I say is like, dip your toe in the water. You can cap the supply, cap the supply to like 10, and offer one thing. I mean, I think Oxen has done a phenomenal job of this. Like, he offers three things, which is a monthly subscriber edition. So it's a piece of art that's not a limited edition and it's not an open edition. Its edition size is commensurate with the number of unique subscribers every month. Uh, and then he does a group chat and he does a raffle for a one of one, and that's it. And so that's something that it's a fairly low lift for him. He can do that consistently, uh, and it works. I think people have done quarterly subscriptions for that same reason. So I think like it should be integrated into your existing process. It shouldn't be new work that you're doing. So if you're an artist and you're making art already, then great. Just offer that. If you're like, I mean, you could go really far with this. You could say, "Oh, I'm gonna make process videos, and I'm gonna do screen recordings, and I'm gonna do sketches, and I'm gonna do all in a group chat, all this other stuff." Hey, if you're already doing that, cool. Then then it's like smooth sailing. But I get a little worried when people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna take on all these new things." I'm like, okay, if you feel confident that you can commit to doing that, to that schedule on a long term, great. But if not, then do the opposite. Offer the smallest amount of things. So that would be like my first piece of advice. The second is, what we've noticed is there's this kind of high margin, low volume approach, or low margin, high volume. In other words, if you pick a really high price or a higher price, you're going to tend to have fewer subs. If you pick a lower price, you're going to tend to have more subs. There's no right or wrong. It is entirely, I mean, we have a few artists who have a fairly high price point and they're very happy with that. They're like, yeah, I'd rather have like a much smaller community of people who are, diehard supporters than like 1,000 people who like don't really care. Other people want the opposite. They see Hypersub as a distribution channel. They want to get their work into as many wallets as possible, and so they pick a much lower price point. One thing I've learned is that every artist and every creator has their own unique kind of business, their own unique approach that works for them, their work, their audience, and so like it's kind of up to them to decide, okay, what's best for me. And I think we've tried to make Hypersub as flexible, as malleable as possible so that it could kind of meet them where they are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also, for my newsletter, I also spent some time thinking about this, and yeah, what I read at the time is that you should go a bit higher, and then you can always go down. But the opposite is a bit
Yeah.
complicated, right? To
Yeah.
kind of bring your price up, it's not that easy. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So
In
V2 will have tiers and
mm,
it'll have adjustable pricing. So that was a big complaint. Like we initially in the V1 were like, we don't want to make the price updatable because we don't want people to be able to rug.
yeah.
Uh, but
Mm,
we figured out a way to do this that kind of mitigates that. And so having tiers, so you'll have like, for example, a free tier or a lower price tier, and then you can have higher price tiers. You can offer different benefits. It also gives subscribers the option to kind of dip their toe in the water as well. So I think we're addressing that. You know, that'll be that'll just give creators more flexibility and not feel like they have to kind of commit to one thing or the other. Because the thing is, like, price discovery is a process. You know, you don't necessarily know what to price your work at, and
yeah,
also too that may change as your audience scales. So creators having the flexibility to kind of adjust there, I think, is really important.
right. Definitely. And yeah, and they can increase. I mean, I could add a tier now if I add something else, right? Or so it gives more flexibility also to grow kind of your creator business, right? And what about Johnny? Do you think that because Hypersub is operating in the crypto space in Web3, do you feel like um, kind of consumers are more prone to spend in Web3 rather than in Web2 because it's so easy, right? It's just one click and then you
Yeah,
transfer your ETH compared to putting your credit card information. You know, do you feel like that's something that's positive for Hypersub that crypto is
yeah,
more super financialized, and do you think that
yeah.
helps?
I do. I think there's been many jokes made about like crypto not feeling like real money, you
Mm,
know, like, and I think there's like it's a common joke because there's something about it that's true that I think a lot of people feel, and so I do think that's beneficial. Um, the other thing is, I think people in crypto are kind of fee insensitive. You know, there's a lot of fees that people pay just doing stuff, like whether it's swapping tokens or buying art or whatever. So we actually don't charge end users. We take 4% from the creator. So I think like there's even less friction there, especially once we have free tiers. Like they'll be actually free, not you know
yeah.
uh, free plus a fee, which is just like saying not free. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think that's good. I also think like there is something very, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I put in my credit card, like on a Web2 platform, you know that thing's just going to run forever until you cancel it. And so there's something that's like kind of off putting about that. Whereas I actually do like the control of being like, I'm going to subscribe to this person for a year or a month or whatever it is. And like, that's it. And if it's good and I am engaged, I will resubscribe. Like, Phil from Bright Moments had a funny cast about this. He said, at the end of the year, every year, I will cancel my credit cards and get new credit cards. And then all my subscriptions break.
Yeah.
And then I'll only enter my credit card into like back into the apps that I like want to keep. And it's like this funny hack, which is actually, you don't have to do any of that stuff with the way we've kind of built Hypersub, is because you're just determining up front the amount of time you want to subscribe for, and then that's it. So yeah, I actually think like in many ways, like crypto has like a lot to learn from the Web 2 world, you know, the last 30 years of software development. But I think there's also like fundamentally new things that we should be leaning into, you know? And I think that, you know, fee insensitivity and like, you know, novel forms of subscriptions are like one of them. If you think about a creator, there's an outsized benefit that the early supporters provide to that creator. So, for example, the first 100 people who subscribe, I would argue, are like far more valuable than, you know, the 10,100 people, you know, uh, because when you're starting out, you're unproven. and it's risky. And so when someone says, I believe in you, I'm going to support you, it's like really powerful. And so our view is that the creator should have the option to reward those people, to give them an outsized reward. And the best way for them to do that is for the creator to cut those supporters into their upside. So the way that this works is when you deploy Hypersub NFT, you can say, sure, I'll share 10% of my revenue with my early supporters. And so what happens is there's a pool that gets created on chain. And so for, let's say, every $100 that you make, $10 will go into the pool. And the question then becomes, well, who gets the $10? How does that get divided up? And the answer is that the earlier you subscribe and the longer period of time you subscribe for, the greater, like the more, the bigger the slice of that 10% slice that you'll have. So it's a slice of a slice. So the more percentage ownership in the 10% pool I will have, depending on when I subscribe. And so this is basically a way to incentivize people to subscribe early and for a very long period of time. The people that do that on subscriptions that grow are the benefactors of that growth. So their like incentives are very, very tightly aligned with the creator, which seems like the best way to do it. And then the inverse is also true. So if you lapse, if you churn, your rewards can get slashed, and so you lose out on the upside. And many people have said like, oh, you should make it an ERC20 token. You should make, it should be much more flexible. And our view is like, look, revenue is the most valuable thing that a creator can share. And the most valuable thing that a creator can have is supporters, is subscribers. And so like, it has to be one for one. There's no free lunch. You can't get exposure to the creator's upside unless you're contributing, unless you're, putting money in. So that was kind of the like design principle. And it's been funny to see, like, some people hate it. They just think it feels like a scam. It feels like too speculative. And then other people love it. They think that's like the most exciting thing that we're doing. And so that tells me that we're onto something. Anytime you have something that's like that has that much of that's like that polarizing, I think that's a strong signal that there's like something interesting happening there. So we have some fun ideas that we'll announce in the V2 that I think stay true to the kind of design principle, but that also kind of create some new interactions there.
Yeah, and I also really like the referral system. So basically, anybody can refer your Hypersub and get part of the revenue. That's really, really powerful, and it's all built on chain. So, for example, yesterday I shared a Hypersub from M. Branson in my newsletter, and a couple of people subscribed. So I got like $80 or something like that, and
Nice.
that's very powerful. And I will continue to get that revenue if they keep renewing on M. Branson's Hypersub, which, by the way, is a great one. I think that's really, really a great incentive. It kind of adds up on the creators and also supporters. And Jonny, I just want to go back to, you mentioned early on Hypersub, it was hard to get creators in. It kind of felt like you built something that nobody was using, and then after some time now, it's like it's in a great shape. It's moving super fast. But can you tell us some advice for some founders, for creators on your marketing? Because you have been super active on Farcaster, you have great memes, and it feels like that's your marketing strategy. So can you tell us how you think about this? Is this something like you just do for fun, or do you actually see it working to attract people to Hypersub and whatever you're building?
Yeah, it was the former and then the latter. So it started off, I mean, when I joined Farcaster, there was like 600 users. It's like really small. So it was fun, like, I mean, I just thought it was funny to post memes and to make people laugh. And so it just wasn't that serious. One thing I did take seriously is having a distribution channel, and a marketing channel. So for the longest time, I mentioned I just kind of worked as an operator. I was a freelancer. I was like behind the scenes. I didn't really. I was not active on Twitter. Didn't care about that. And then when I founded Fabric, I knew like, okay, you have to have a channel. You have to have a megaphone somewhere, because how else are you going to get the word out? How else are people going to hear about what you're doing? If you're not sharing it, nobody else is going to share it for you. And so I remember thinking like, okay, I need to be active somewhere. And so I created a Twitter account, was trying to tweet, and it just felt like a black hole. It felt like I was just shouting into the void. No one noticed, no one cared. Felt like it just was nothing. And then I had heard about Farcaster from Dan on Twitter, DM'd him, got an invite. And then within, I think the first thing I ever casted, there was a bunch of replies and likes, and it was like, and when I say a bunch, I mean like 5.
Yeah.
But it felt like, oh, okay, I'm heard here. And there's other founders, there's builders, investors, people doing cool stuff. Like, okay, I'm going to commit to this. It's small, but if it grows, I'll grow with it. So that was kind of like a bet that I made. And also too, it was more fun to me. And so that was a bet that paid off. Like Farcaster's growth has been extraordinary. And by being early and being very active, I have benefited from that growth. Like I've grown as a result. And so that's caused me to obviously take it more seriously. But the memes, I feel like, are a check on that. It's like a way to not take it too seriously. And I think that's a risk that everyone can, it's a trap that everyone can fall into, whether you're a musician, a writer, a founder, whatever it is. It's important not to take yourself too seriously. And so I like posting memes because they make me laugh, they make other people laugh. But to your point about marketing, one thing I've noticed is that there's like karma is real, and you get back what you give. And if you help people, people will help you. And so what I find is like I feel like I'm the court jester. I make people laugh, and I think people like me because of that, and they want to help me. And so when I post Fabric things or Hypersub things, like we just announced this accelerator program, the response was like overwhelmingly positive, and I think there's something cosmic, there's some karma thing there where you putting good vibes out there, you're making people laugh, you're supporting others, you're helping founders behind the scenes by making intros and so on. And then when it's your time to say, hey, I'm putting work out there, people reciprocate, it comes
Yeah.
back. So part of it is a calculated marketing strategy, and then like part of it is just trying to make people laugh and have fun on the internet.
Yeah. Being part of the movement, right? The culture, the podcaster
Yeah.
culture, and internet culture, Web3 culture. I think that's it's not easy, but memes make it easier, and especially if you have fun creating them. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's fantastic, Jonny. I think we are getting close to the hour. It was, I mean, amazing. Thanks so much for joining, Jonny. I'm super happy we got to meet and have this discussion, and I cannot wait to see what Hypersub looks like in a year from now.
I appreciate the creative work you're doing. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.